Hi everyone, my name is Erica. I just kicked the light. I'm a new YouTuber and I'm a registered nurse, not a videographer. But today specifically, I wanted to talk to you guys about, what was I talking to you guys about? My first travel assignment. I can't wait to tell you guys about this experience that I've had because it's been quite the experience. This first assignment, I feel like I really got thrown into like one of the most difficult situations straight off the bat. To start off, I am in LA currently. I moved from San Diego outside of the 50-mile radius, and I'm currently in a guest house that I am renting that I found on furnishfinder.com. I can talk to you guys more about the specifics of what it's like when you're looking for housing as a travel nurse, but this is something that I found and it took a little bit of trial and error. So now I'm in a more residential area in a guest house and I absolutely love it. Starting at the hospital, I would say the first thing that I have experienced is the overwhelming lack of support. And like I mentioned earlier, this is something that you obviously expect as a travel nurse. That's why they need you. The hospital has a lack of nurses, lack of support, lack of equipment, lack of everything. The first noticeably different thing about the lack of resources is the lack of staff. And the hospital that I'm at specifically is a very small hospital where 75% of the nurses are actually travelers. So I'm used to working at a very large facility. My first job was at a level 1 trauma center. Typically when you work as a staff nurse at a hospital, the hospital usually has a group of people who have worked as nurses at that hospital for an extended period of time. The hospital that I worked at had nurses who had been on the unit for years, sometimes more than 10 years they had worked there. And if you have questions, you can always rely on the fact that there's somebody there who has that answer. Since more than half of the nurses who work on this unit are actually travelers, chances are if you have a question, many people won't have the answer, and they might actually be asking the same thing themselves.
I don't know. That's a good question.
I don't know.
There are definitely pros and cons to having the unit be composed of mostly travelers. Obviously, this is a negative aspect of that is when you need something answered. Unfortunately, a lot of the travelers don't know the protocols. They don't know where things are. They don't know how things work at this hospital because they're in the same boat as you. But that also brings me to the positive aspect of this, is that they're all in the same boat as you. And you don't feel like the odd person out coming into this unit culture that has already been set in stone. I will say what was even crazy about the fact of me training was that I was trained by another traveler. That's how many travelers are on this unit. Working at a bigger hospital, a lot of times you can have something called a resource nurse. This is just a nurse who doesn't actually have any patients for that day, but they're scheduled to be there as a resource for you. They can help you with giving medications if you're busy, with checking your blood sugars, with helping you with admissions or discharges. And the larger hospital that I worked at prior to travel nursing, a lot of days we had this resource nurse. Not only does this hospital not have a resource nurse, that does not exist at all, most of the time we are understaffed to the point where we actually have to take more patients and we're out of ratio. In California, we have patient ratios where we're only allotted a certain amount of patients based on their acuity or how sick they are. So a lot of times when you're supposed to have 4 patients, you'll actually have 5. Aside from not having a resource nurse, I also sometimes didn't have a charge nurse. And if you're a nurse, you know how scary that is. A charge nurse is somebody who is responsible for running the unit. They're the person that helps decide what beds get placed onto your unit, what transfers from the emergency room or the ICU come to you. Some of the most hectic and scary days that I've had as a travel nurse so far have been the days where we didn't have a travel nurse. I had some very alarming experiences that probably could have been avoided had there been somebody there, and instead I was just left on my own. And that brings me to the fact that sometimes we'll just have one CNA on the unit, other times we won't have any. And I was a nursing assistant before I was a nurse, and I just know the value and how much they help nurses. They do so much, and it is so helpful having them. And it is one of the most obvious things when the nursing assistant is not on the unit, and it just makes your job harder. Aside from just the staffing differences and having a lack of people who are there to help you, there's also differences with the equipment and lack of that equipment and lack of the equipment working. Many times the equipment actually is broken. And the other day I needed to give a patient a medication and needed to check their blood pressure. And it took me over 15 minutes to find a vital sign machine that was working and then getting it to work properly. And when you're busy and you have a lot going on, you don't have 15 minutes for that. And I know it's starting to sound super negative and like everything has been going bad or poorly as a travel nurse in this experience, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily been bad. It's just been a lot and it's been difficult and it's been challenging, and there are ups and downs every single day. And some days are easier than others, and that's just what nursing is. But typically days are more challenging based on the lack of resources that the hospital has. There are definitely a lot of scary things that have happened on the unit, and I'm sure you've heard horror stories from other nurses, but when I first got to this unit, I didn't realize that it's kind of like a DOU, and I selected to travel as a telemetry nurse because that's what I have experience in. And this unit, we have patients who are on vents, we have patients who are on cardiac drips, we have patients who are requiring the need of a nurse who is specialized in DOU and progressive care or a step down or whatever you want to call it. And unfortunately, I wasn't trained in that. So a lot of nurses actually leave because of this, travel nurses specifically, because they recognize, hey, this isn't a tele unit, you call it that, but we're doing a lot of things that are actually considered DOU. And, you know, there's reasons that they can get around it by saying, well, you don't titrate the cardiac drips, and respiratory are the ones that deal with the vents. But ultimately, if you're the person who is responsible for that patient and you're that nurse that is responsible if something happens, you want to know how to work the machine that your patient is requiring to stay alive. You never want to put yourself in a position where you're taking care of a patient and you aren't 100% sure what's going on with them. If you don't know about vents and you don't want to take that patient, don't take that patient. You can say no, and you need to exercise your ability to say no. So I've taken the time to thankfully learn all about vents, all about cardiac drips, and so many things that the DOU does that I was never trained on. And when I first got my patient with my first vent, one of the travel nurses that I work with thankfully took that patient, and she was like, I've worked with them, don't worry. And she allowed me to train myself on it with my respiratory therapist prior to actually taking that patient, which made me feel more comfortable going into it the next time that I had that happen. So while it is scary that there have been things that I've been asked to do that I haven't necessarily been trained on, I've looked at it as a growing experience so that when I go to my next assignment, I can feel confident that I am now able to work with a wider array of patients because I've learned so much more. There's a lot less room for error when you're a travel nurse, and you really need to be careful of what you're doing. And I feel like this first experience of travel nursing has really allowed me to properly set myself up for success and not to put myself in a situation where I'm gonna risk my license or my patient's safety. Ultimately, I know that this all sounds really scary, but I will say that it has been worth it for me. I feel like such a more confident nurse, and I have had to utilize my gut instinct so many times and learn to trust that. And that alone has made it worth it because I feel like I'm a safer nurse. It can really feel overwhelming some days, and it is not easy. As negative as this does sound, I really do hope that you guys find encouragement in how rewarding it is to learn this pace. This experience has been crazy, and honestly, coming home after a shift has just been so draining. And one of the things that has really encouraged me on this travel assignment is reminding myself of a verse in Matthew. The verse is Matthew 11:28 through 30, and it says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And that's always been very encouraging to me, and it just reminds me that we don't need to be carrying that burden. You can take that and you can put that on Jesus, and he will take it from you. And reminding myself of that, especially during this trying time, has been the breath of fresh air that I have needed in this what seems to be disastrous situation of travel nursing. My camera just died, but like I was saying, I hope that this is encouraging to you and not discouraging to you, and you can just recognize that travel nursing is difficult, and this first experience that I've had has definitely not been easy, and I'm not sure that that's how it is for everybody, but hopefully it allows you to have a better understanding of what your first assignment might be like. And I am excited to make more videos explaining how the travel nursing experience for me has been going and answering those questions that you guys have about it, especially because we work in such a negative place, and I would love to bring some light to that and some positivity to that while being transparent and not misleading people to thinking that it is glamorous or an easy job being a nurse. And if you guys made it this far, please like, please subscribe, and please comment on my videos, because I'm just starting this channel and I would love to continue creating content for you and it getting out to as many people as possible. So thank you guys for watching, and more videos to come soon.